Welcome to ONS Energy Talks. My name is Ingvild Meland and I'm the Program Director of the ONS Foundation. Today we will talk about India, we'll talk about energy and we'll talk about politics. And we are very pleased to have with us as dear guest. He is a dear friend of ONS, he's a member of our ONS International Advisory Board. He's the chairman of the Independent Energy Policy Institute in New Delhi. He's a very engaged politician and TV commentator, and he's the national spokesperson for BJP, the Indian governing party. Mr. Narendra Taneja, welcome.
Thank you, Ingvild. Thanks for having me.
We're very glad to have you with us, but I have to first ask you, how are you and your family doing in these tough days?
Well, good question, and generally fine, I would say. We are India, so in the sense that we are used to looking at things philosophically a lot. That's our tradition. So now we find ourselves in this situation where we can't go out. We have to maintain social distancing. So maintaining social distancing, for someone from India, because culturally we are very social people. We are a very close society. So to maintain that is a bit tough, but then that's the demand. That's what coronavirus wants us to do, and we are doing that. But it's a bit tough. It's a bit tough, and it's a very strict lockdown in India. We have to do that. We have large number of people who do not understand what actually lockdown means, which means that you have to enforce it very strongly in some places, in some parts of the country. But by and large, we are doing fine. I mean, we get more time to spend with the children, and we're spending a lot of time on using technology, having conferences over Zoom and Skype and other technological platforms. So I wouldn't say it's all wonderful, because I love traveling. I love meeting people. I love to go out to eat. I love to socialize, and I love to travel all over the world. So that's all put on hold. Something I was not mentally prepared for, and never thought will be in this kind of situation. But that's what it is. So I'm looking at it very philosophically. If that's the will of nature, I accept it, and I'm trying to kind of deal with it, go with it, and keeping a smile on the face, because you have no alternative anyway.
I'm glad to hear that you're able to take such a positive view on it, and hopefully the government will be able to take necessary measures and minimize the consequences. But let's jump to the topics which is core to your heart. Narendra, you are a global capacity when it comes to energy markets, when it comes to policy, geopolitics, energy poverty. And I'd like to start with the broader picture. How do you see Asia's role in the big geopolitical energy-related picture?
Well, it's an interesting question, Ingvild. I mean, you look at it, coronavirus was a trigger. And we saw what happens in the commodities market, most particularly oil market. Coronavirus was the trigger. The prices started moving southward, and we thought prices almost crashed. And then suddenly we saw that, OPEC, within OPEC, Saudi Arabia, outside OPEC, Russia, that they were not getting along. That was unprecedented in a way. We thought they were very close friends. Russia was perceived to be almost part of the OPEC, but suddenly they were like, rivals. They were fighting almost. And then we saw the United States emerging on the horizon, and then playing a bigger role than what the United States used to in terms of stabilizing oil prices. Situation, these three oil superpowers, the United States, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, more or less on the same page. And which means that, and they've decided to go for unprecedented cut in terms of production, roughly 10 million barrels. So that's like, for big importers in Asia, like India, China, Korea, Japan, I mean, this is a very, very different situation. Coronavirus was a trigger, but now we are in a situation where we find that almost all major producers of oil they are on the same page. They're talking the same language. They agreed for this unprecedented cut. So far, so fine. Fine if they want to push the prices up, and if the prices go up to, let's say, $40 per barrel over the next 3 months, that should be okay. Markets like India can absorb that. Not a big challenge, not a big issue. But the issue is that if all the producers, whether you're OPEC or non-OPEC, you're Russia, you all basically start getting together in order to basically control oil prices. If this is the beginning, I hope tomorrow They don't all agree, and they say, all right, now that we know each other, we know each other's grammar very well, we speak the same language, how about taking the prices up to $60 per barrel artificially? So we are a little bit, kind of keeping our fingers crossed. This we didn't expect what has happened, and but we hope that this will be the end of the story, and then the market will basically be controlling the prices, because all the major oil importers are in Asia, and at the same time, when you look at coronavirus situation in Asia is better than in Europe or the United States. Like in India, we are at home to 1.3 billion people, but hardly 10,000 people has got this virus, and we have got very, very strict regime in terms of controlling it. And India is, by and large, if you look at on per capita basis, India is doing fine in terms of the coronavirus spread. But at the same time, when it comes to energy, we see landscape changing a bit. Asia will still remain the most powerful region in terms of demand, but we see that it's changing in terms of renewables also. It will be interesting to watch once the world recovers from coronavirus, what happens to renewables, and we hope that there will be major push for renewables. But as I said, right now, Asia is basically dealing with it, and more successfully than OECD, than United States and Europe. So far, we don't know what happens tomorrow. This virus is unpredictable, but I'm talking the situation as of today. But in terms of energy, we see landscape changing, we see equations changing, we see dynamics changing, we see some dimensions changing. So this is going to be a very, very interesting time in 2020 and post 2020 in terms of oil geopolitics, in terms of renewable geopolitics, and then also in terms of energy politics as a whole.
I'm very glad that you say that kind of collaboration has proved to be the strongest strategy in this solving this oil price crisis that we've been seeing these latest weeks. But just moving back to kind of pre-corona, I mean, we've seen an increasing tension on the US and China. At the same time, US has become a net exporter of energy. China kind of maybe a bit reluctant to be too dependent on the US. How do you see India in this energy, being a net importer of energy, and kind of these alliances, rivalries in the energy supply and energy demand? Where is India in this? Who are the biggest allies?
Well, good. When you look at the energy picture as a whole, of course, the United States is a big pole. And then China is trying to emerge as a big pole. And China, to some extent, is actually a very, very important pole already. And then we have got some other poles, such as European Union and Russia. And of course, the GCC bloc in the Middle East, and Japan, and to some extent, Australia and all that. So far, what we have seen is basically these poles in many places cooperating and collaborating, but also in many places we have seen that, they also collide. And China in particular, we have seen that, they've been cooperating, collaborating, but very often they have been also on the collision path, let's say in South China Sea, with India, with the United States, in terms of, oil exploration offshore of Vietnam. We have also seen that in eastern part of Russia, including the region near Sakhalin. And at the same time, we have seen in terms of the Gulf countries, the Middle East, the major supplier of oil, natural gas to the whole world. We have seen that, the growing Chinese influence, and we have seen at the same time growing India's influence in the Middle East. And India in particular, since geographically India is very close to the Middle East, India has been deepening its ties with Saudi Arabia, with Iraq, with United Arab Emirates, and at the same time with also Iran, which is a non-Sunni country, a very important country. And there are sanctions against Iran, but we may continue to maintain good relations with Iran. So you see that when you look at the overall picture, and if you include Central Asia in it, and China investing much more money, building pipelines, with Central Asian countries, and at the same time trying to make Central Asian countries more dependent on China in terms of energy, also in terms of overall, export of products and projects and capital. So overall picture, when you look at it, from the energy viewpoint, it's a new world which is emerging. It's a new kind of, great game that is already there, not limited only to Central Asia. You can see that in the Middle East, you can see that in South China Sea, you can also increasingly see it in the Indian Ocean area, and even parts of Africa now. So it's a new world emerging, new chessboard which is now in the making. And therefore, we find that, there India playing an important role. Not that India wants to play that role, just because we are we are among the top 4 energy players in the world. We are the 3rd largest buyers of oil. We are the 4th among the top 4 energy markets in the world. And at the same time, here we are a country with 1.3 billion people, and with 1 billion people is still living in a situation where they don't have access to sufficient amount of energy. And we have to mobilize energy for them, because we are a democracy. You can't deny energy to them if they want it. And with the economy growing at the same time, so we find ourselves, when we have to basically mobilize sufficient energy for our people, and bulk of it has to be imported, because we import roughly 86% of our total requirement of oil, close to 50% requirement of our natural gas. We are also importing even coal, though we are coal surplus, and we also import uranium for our nuclear power projects and so forth. In power equipment, solar power equipment, also renewables, we import bulk of equipment from China and other countries. So overall situation is that our dependence in imports is very, very high. So we have to strike the right balance in terms of how do we want to do it, at the same time maintaining good relations with all the countries we are dependent on in terms of importing either equipment or oil or natural gas or uranium. So overall picture you find is extremely complex. But our strategy is basically that you cooperate and collaborate, you negotiate, you come up with new ideas. We have set up, like, it's, for instance, International Solar Alliance as India's lead in terms of bringing the world together on solar energy. So many other initiatives are being launched. Just recently, G20, in G20, India actively participated. There was a G20 meeting of energy ministers, where all the energy ministers, just 2 days ago, where India played a very important role and contributed massively in terms of ideas. So I think that's what basically emerging. And we see India playing even bigger and bigger role, especially in 2 areas. If just very quickly, 2 areas. First is international energy governance. The international energy governance order needs to be, we need to put in place some kind of framework, so that there is a more competent, more comprehensive, more formalized international energy governance. Right now, there's practically nothing. The same, number 2, at the same time, bring it closer to international climate governance. There is international climate governance, there are frameworks and everything, thanks to the Paris deal. But so we are trying to basically bring these together, so that it can serve interest of countries like India and other emerging economies even more forcefully or more fruitfully.
Thank you for that. I mean, I've heard that someone say, maybe it was you, that saying that India needs all the energy it can get. And if you take that expression and you discuss it in kind of in an energy transition point of view, how would you say this is a good description? Do you need all the energy you could get, despite what sources it is, or is India taking a strong position on the energy transition?
Well, we have a very strong position on energy transition, and we want to get rid of fossil fuels as soon as we can. We want to get rid of coal as soon as we can. But the fact remains, when it comes to, we have to look at picture very realistically. Here we are talking of mobilizing energy for 1.30 billion people, out of which 1 billion people still don't have access to sufficient amount of energy. Now, the question is, when we look at the energy transition picture as a whole, we don't enjoy the luxury that, for instance, some countries do, like Sweden or Germany or Canada and many others. We are heavily dependent. And at the same time, so every single source of energy that's available domestically, for instance, coal, we need to exploit it, we need to use it. The same goes for hydrocarbons. The same goes for some other sources of energy. At the same time, our commitment to renewables is absolutely very, very deep. It's 100%. We know that when you use fossil fuels, there is a cost to the society, there is a cost to health, there is a cost to environment. We're extremely sensitive to it. But at the same time, we also realize that we must mobilize sufficient amount of energy for every single Indian, every single of our 1.3 billion Indians. So now we have to strike the right balance. And therefore, our energy transition is very different from energy transition in Sweden or Norway, Germany, Japan, or for that matter, even China. So our energy transition is basically, we are, on the one hand, we are sensitive to climate. We are very sensitive to the kind of growing public opinion, in favor of this or against that. At the same time, making sure that those about close to 700 million people in India who live below energy poverty line, which means in simple terms, who are energy poor, that we pull them up and make sure that they have access to energy, sufficient amount of energy. So, I mean, that's a huge, huge challenge. At the same time, we are going for energy transition, which is visible, which you people can recognize the world over, and something that of which we can also be proud of. So India is in a very, very unique and different situation, because unless you have been in India, spent some time, most people can't understand what we're trying to do or what actually I mean. But that's the challenge. So energy transition in India is going to take a long time before you see it's actually completing. Maybe 3, 4 decades, maybe 5 decades, maybe 60 years. We don't know. But one thing is very clear: we are committed to energy transition. This is going to be energy transition with very strong Indian characteristics and features. And so if you want to, you have some problem with it, it only means you have not tried to understand India's ground realities, thoroughly. So please do that if you have any kind of reservation, or you're critical, or you have questions, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, as I said, our first commitment is to the health of our people. We want clean sky, we want green, blue sky, and we are doing everything possible. At the same time, we want to make sure that every single Indian has sufficient of access to sufficient amount of energy, and we need every single source of energy that's available. You name it in the world, you name it from some other planet, we are interested in that.
I'm glad to hear that your first priority is access to energy and bringing people out of energy poverty, but also out of poverty. I just want to build on something your Minister of Railway and Commerce said. We had the pleasure of visiting you at the Global Energy Policy Summit in New Delhi in February, and he said something like, "I'm disappointed that the international financial institutions are taking money out of oil and gas because it puts brakes on the energy transition in India." Could you comment on that?
You see, basically the comment on that was, in some country, we are an emerging economy. We are a developing country. We need more capital. We need more capital, more technology, so that we can accelerate the pace of energy transition, so that we can accelerate the process of energy, access to energy by our people. So if, for instance, there are restrictions put on us in terms of capital or technology, then of course, you're not helping the energy transition in the country. You're not helping in eradicating energy poverty. For instance, just for the sake of discussion, I respect a lot Norwegian sovereign fund. And I think Norway is a great country in terms of, how energy, one should go about energy sector as a whole. But at the same time, if the sovereign fund of Norway, or for that matter, any other country, they say, look, if you are using coal, or if you are using oil and all that, and then we are not going to invest in your country, or we are not going to invest in equity or shares of oil company or gas companies and so on, for ideological reasons, because we think that's not right. But the question is that I think I can understand if the sovereign fund of a country like, let's say, Norway, they say we will not invest in oil shares, or in Norway, or in Germany, or in a developed country like Japan or Canada. Fully understandable, and I would respect that. But if you say that you will not invest in oil shares of oil companies, even in India, where you need more oil, so that you can actually get rid of oil. You need more oil to get rid of oil. You need more gas to get rid of natural gas, eventually, over 30 years or 40 years from now. And you say we will not invest. So basically, you are not helping the situation, or you are taking a view which is excessively ideological. So I think that's what basically the minister was referring to. So when we see these, and we have seen several sovereign funds trying to follow the Norwegian sovereign fund, with all due respect, I mean, this Norwegian fund, the sovereign fund, they are entitled to their view, they are entitled to their decisions. We respect that. But all I'm saying is, in terms of kind of, how we look at it, our views, I think it'd be nice if they reconsider that when they come and invest in oil markets in countries like India, actually they're helping climate change, they're helping energy transition, they're helping, India, accelerating the process of energy transition towards, green energy. I think that's how they should look at it, instead of basically, using one rule, one stick for the whole world. Because the whole world is not one place. There are different countries, different compulsions, different landscape, and different strategies.
I'm glad to hear that you need capital, you need foreign investments also into the energy sector. What do you see as the most important or the most interesting opportunities in energy in India these days?
Oh, plenty. When you look at India, for instance, I mean, I'll start with offshore. I think, in the oil and gas sector, when you look at the offshore, in particular, the exploration production in deep water and ultra deep water in the Bay of Bengal, in the Arabian Sea, in the Kerala Konkan area, I think there we need technology, We need companies which have got experience or technology and capital, and at the same time, the company which are interested in exploration in India, and at the same time, Indian market. We are probably the most attractive oil market in the world today. We are among the top two most attractive gas markets in the world today. So if you can come and invest, in oil exploration production, India's oceans, I think extremely attractive. Also onshore, of course, but offshore is very attractive. Number two is, offshore wind is one area where many countries in your part of the world, in Europe and other places, they've got the experience of offshore wind. They have technology. They also have capital. So they're most welcome. There's huge opportunities here for us to set up these offshore wind farms, along the Indian coast. We have got the coastline of about 6,700 kilometers. It's a huge coastline on the both sides, east and west. So the huge opportunity, and at the same time, India is an energy-starved country, which means that, for a population of 1.3 billion people, we still produce only 380,000 megawatt of electricity. We need to produce at least 800,000 megawatt of electricity, eventually even 1 million megawatt of electricity. If you have to feed and, more, make electricity available to more people. And at the same time, India is moving in the direction of age of electricity. Right now, we are in oil and gas. We are moving more in the direction of natural gas, but eventually our target is, we are working to enter with full force in the age of electricity. We want India to enter the age of electricity as soon as possible. And 2030, we have a huge focus on electric vehicles and so on and so forth. So that's number two, offshore. Number three is, of course, renewables in terms of solar. India is very blessed in terms of solar radiation, and so at the same time, it's a massive country. When you look at the size of India, it is the size of, it has like the continental dimensions. So and as I said earlier, the people need more energy. So if you enter India in the space of renewable energy, you just can't go wrong. You don't even need to commission any thorough big study. The market is so obvious. Opportunities are so obvious. You can get into a manufacturing of equipment. You can get into power projects, or you can just come as an investor, invest wherever you see the right opportunities. And the fourth area, which I don't know whether you don't cover in ONS, that is a nuclear power. In India, we see nuclear power as a major source of energy 2050 and beyond. We are investing heavily in nuclear power, and the companies and the countries interested in nuclear power, they should also look at India, because we have very good experience, very good track record in terms of safety, and at the same time, amount of energy, electricity in particular, as we enter the age of electricity, I think, sky is the limit, and India is already among the most attractive market in terms of nuclear power.
You say that the sky is the limit when it comes to opportunity in energy, ranging from oil and gas and renewables and nuclear, and also into infrastructure. And I know that you have been working to advise companies on how to succeed in India. What are you saying to them? What is the keys what are the keys to succeed when doing business, energy business in India?
Three things. Number one, that India is a democracy. What do I mean by democracy? When you look at energy transition and democracy has its own way of working. And democracy in energy transition, democracy takes slightly longer time. In authoritarian countries, dictatorial countries, energy transition can move faster, but then there are many weaknesses, in terms of the overall the system that you have got in place. India is a democracy. Laws are the same for everyone. When you're a foreign investor, come to India, you have any issues, any challenge, any kind of problems, you can just knock at the door of a court, and you will get justice. The same way, for instance, we do it. So I think, first strength of India is a democracy. Democracy by itself means that if you come, and it's always a safer place to invest your hard-earned capital. Number two is very obvious that India is a very strong market in terms of, the opportunities. Simply because you see, for 1.3 billion people, you look at the amount of electricity, gas, per capita energy consumption is among the lowest in the world. At the same time, we are a democracy, which means that we have no option. If people want more energy, we have to provide it. Otherwise, the government in power will be thrown out. So unlike dictatorial countries, authoritarian regimes. So here, people want energy. And today, if you go to India, across India, the number one item on the agenda of the people in terms of their aspiration, in terms of their ambition, in terms of their demand is energy. They just don't want more energy, because that improves their quality of life. So you cannot improve the quality of life without access to energy. And that's very important. So number two, that means you have security in terms of demand, security in terms of market. Number three is that, India is a pool. We have lots of talented people, English speaking, very talented people, good managers, good engineers. So you don't really have to go out. All you have to do is set your eye on India, come here with a suitcase, plan carefully, and and say take a hard view of India and take a long view of India. And when you come to India, it's important you just don't come here for 2 years or 3 years. In India, when you enter as an investor, come here for life. India will never ever make you feel sorry about it. In 98% of people who come to invest in India, they've been successful. In the energy space, almost 100%. So I think these are very, very strong features, very, very strong points. That's why I always say that if you don't want to do much research, if you want your money safe, if you're looking for a market, you are absolutely sure that you will get the market, come to India. For instance, look at, Norwegian company Equinor, which was earlier known as Statoil. They have only recently entered to India. Only recently they've entered India. And I don't want to talk beyond it, but wait for some time. You're going to get news. Even within the first 6 months, they are actually already making history. So that's what India is for you.
I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad. Hopefully, we'll see success for Equinor in India, like you explained. But and because I want to bring it back to Norway, then, because you are a dear friend of Norway. You have worked in Norway. You have strong business connections here, and you also know ONS very well. And together, we have developed the India Norway Energy Forum together, and to promote opportunities between Norway and India. What do you think Norway has to offer when it comes to success in India?
Very good question, but very easy answer. Actually, Norway may be a small country in terms of size or in terms of population, but Norway is a global leader in energy space. Is a global leader, and Norway is highly respected for what Norway brings to the table in terms of ethics, in terms of values, in terms of technology, in terms of expertise and experience, and many cases even capital. So I think when you look at India, what we lack in India, we need more capital, we need more technology, we need better practices, and we also value the companies which bring ethics and values. So I think when you look at India, what India needs, and look at Norway, what Norway can provide to India, is a win-win. They're made for each other. They're just made for each other. For instance, look at India's hydropower potential. Hydropower potential in India is almost, Himalayas are floating on the hydropower. And we are a country with so many rivers, hundreds and hundreds of rivers. Many rivers, for instance, got further potential in terms of hydropower. And Norway has this tremendous experience. So Norway needs to come here and invest more. And the same goes for offshore. Offshore, solar power, offshore wind power. Also, and solar power as a whole in the country. I think Norway is not as blessed as India in terms of solar radiation, but Norway has experience. So I think that's number three. And number three, which is very important, is how do you run a state-owned enterprise? I think Norway is among the best in the world. I mean, like Equinor is a government company, as we call them. There are some other companies like Telenor, these are government companies. But at the same time, the way these companies are run, the way these companies are managed, and the way for the companies, take care of interest of their stakeholders and shareholders. I think something that countries like India really look with tremendous admiration. So admiration, behind the admiration is, of course, that how do you do it? So I think greater cooperation between India and Norway, company to company, sector to sector, including hydro and, renewables and oil and gas and energy transportation and so on and so forth. I think the sky is the limit. And there is already a lot happening, but I think when you look at the overall potential on the scale of 1 to 10, we have not touched even 1. So you can imagine that there is so much that India and Norway can do, and therefore we have initiated together with you India Norway Energy Forum. You saw the first meeting of that in New Delhi only recently, and there are people already asking for to attending the next round of that meeting and the next round. So I think that's just clearly shows the kind of appetite that is there and the scope that is there.
I'm glad to hear that, and I want to end by a question which I kind of freeing us not only from energy, but what would you say are the biggest challenges for India's future, but also are the biggest hopes for India going forward?
Well, good question. I think, when you look at the world, and when I look at my crystal ball and try to look at 2040, 2050, which looks like, 2050 is very far. It's not. Time moves very fast. We are already 2020. Now, the question, when I look at it 2050, for instance, I think, there are going to be three large economies in the world, three large. And the whole world, basically, these are going to be three major poles, economic poles, and also therefore political poles: China, India, and the United States. And which means that these countries are going to be basically India and China together, not only Asia, their reach and their influence will be practically, will be felt all across the world. United States may not be what it is today, but United States will still be among the three most important countries. At the same time, I see the poverty would have ended by that time. There would be no poverty in the world. People would have sufficient amount of energy available, but still energy would be among the biggest businesses in the world. But the region, India, China, European Union, I hope European Union stays as it is and it grows further. I think it's very important it does. And the United States. You will find all these three major countries, energy players, energy superpowers, and the great economies of the world. These economies are going to be so big that humankind has never ever experienced that size. Never experienced, like, for instance, India being like a 45 or 50 trillion dollar economy on PPP terms. China, slightly bigger. United States, more or less the same size. So here we are talking India, China. Among these three, we are going to see this huge, massive size of economy, which humankind has never seen, which means prosperity, smile on the face, and the quality of life, all going to see tremendous, tremendous change. And the region and the continent, which should take advantage of that, which should be Africa. Africa would still need the experience and expertise of countries like India, China, and all that. And all these three major countries should actually help Africa to become even better than India, better than China, better than the United States, and learn from our mistakes. India is committing a lot of mistakes. China has committed blunders, including coronavirus. And of course, the United States committed many mistakes. It's important. Africa, they should build a new Africa. Africa should become a role model for us. Africa should be a kind of continent which is actually not committed the same mistake as we have done while making progress. So Africa becomes greener. Color of sky should be there, the bluest ever. And Africa should basically go for renewable energy and better sources of energy, better sources of development, better sources of sustainable development, which humankind has always wished but has not experienced so far. Africa can become by 2050 the most livable continent on the planet.
I'm glad to hear that, Narendra. I just want to see if we've caught the right thing in this, caught the right things in this talks. You're saying that we have a new chessboard in the making when it comes to global geopolitics and energy. You say that the most important elements for India when it comes to energy is actually to fight poverty and secure access to energy for all. And you're 100% dedicated to a renewable development. It just will take more time than people will expect. And India needs to be remembered as a strong democracy, as a strong nation of strong talents, and as a nation of a market where energy is persistent when it comes to energy. And I also think that we need to say that there is a huge opportunities for international investors or international companies in the energy sector in India. And they need to follow the local rules, but they will bring their suitcase and they will stay for life.
Well,
is that okay?
Yes, you have summed it up beautifully, Ingvild. Beautiful. Yeah, that's what exactly I mean. So you have actually summed it up so brilliantly, so beautifully.
Thank you very much, Narendra Taneja, for joining us. And thank you very much for our listeners for the ONS Energy Talk. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You too.